Hello, everybody, and welcome. Can you all hear me okay? I am very excited to join everyone on this call. I already see about 27 numbers of people growing and growing, so I will hop straight into everything. My name is Colleen Baker. I am a digital producer here at the Houston Chronicle. I am here in the building as we speak. And we have a very exciting event and panel discussion for you all today. Obviously all about SB4, a huge issue facing our community with immigration and migration in our area. So right off the bat, I want to obviously quickly introduce our experts. We have Harris County Precinct 2 Commissioner Adrian Garcia. Most people are very well aware of his work. We also have lawyer Jennefer Canales-Pelaez, who is an expert in this field as well. And then we also have another lawyer, Parker Sheffy, who is with us. And then our moderator will be Codell Rodriguez here at the Houston Chronicle as well, one of our city metro editors. Y bienvenidos a todos. You will understand and see clearly this is a topic that affects everyone, Latinos in Texas, of course, included. Portions of this will be in Spanish, so I will kind of just say bienvenidos a todos, aquí estamos. Yo soy Colleen Baker, yo soy una periodista digital aquí en el Houston Chronicle. Queremos empezar todos. Dinos a dónde están mirando esta conversación. Tell us where you are obviously tuning in from, what part of Houston, qué área de Houston, o en los Estados Unidos, throughout the US. Where are you tuning in from? Let us know. Start dropping them in the comments. Also, start asking us some questions. We obviously have the panelists here. Mándanos las preguntas ahorita. Vamos a tratar de dar respuestas a todos, pero empieza ahorita, ponerlos en los comentarios. Tenemos un evento muy especial ahorita. Tenemos expertos de esta ley de SB4, de la SB4. Tenemos comisionado del recinto número 2, Adrian Garcia. Mucha gente conoce su trabajo. También tenemos un abogado, Jennefer Canales-Pelaez. Ella trabaja con el Centro de Recursos Legales para los Inmigrantes. Y tenemos otro abogado también, Parker Sheffy, aquí está. Y nuestro presentador, Codell Rodriguez, aquí está en el Houston Chronicle, también un editor de todo metro de la ciudad. Y con eso yo voy a pasarlo a Codell para empezar con las preguntas. Y después de todo vamos a tener una versión de esta conversación disponible en español. We will have an entire part of this, the entire conversation will be translated in Spanish and then sent out via email. So if you are bilingual, if you have someone who wants to speak in Spanish or understand this more from their native Spanish speaking, please share it. So without further ado, I will pass it on to Codell. Codell, take it away.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I just want to jump into the questions immediately, and we'll go ahead and get started. So the first question, I kind of want to direct first to Jennefer and Parker. If you could just explain exactly what SB4, the most recent SB4, would allow police to do and how immigrants not in the country legally would be affected.
Sure. I'll go. Thank you for the question, and hello, everybody. So what is SB4? It's novel, it's new in that it creates a state-level deportation regime. There's new state law crimes related to immigration, and there's also new state-level processes for removing or deporting people. So what then are those new crimes? Well, on the one hand, we have increased minimums. It takes us back to the 90s, I guess, where we have mandatory minimum sentences if an individual commits a certain crime. Well, here, the state is saying that there will be minimum state crimes for, rather, minimum sentences for the commission of smuggling or operating a stash house, which is essentially a house used for the purposes of human trafficking.
I just wanted to add little bit to that context too. So here in Texas, we have 3 different SB4s, just to clarify. So the first SB4 we have is SB4 from 2017, which is the anti-sanctuary movement in response to the Arizona's SB 1070 and sanctuary movement. We also have SB4 from the 3rd special session, which Parker was discussing earlier, which increases the mandatory minimum to 10 years for smuggling and operating stash houses, which is very problematic too, and that is in effect and is currently not being challenged, but we can discuss more about that later. But the other SB4 is SB4 from the 4th special session, which is the state deportation bill, which that one is very, very worrisome. The good thing is it's on pause right now, and we can talk a little bit more about the whiplash that we have experienced recently with that decision. But what it does is it does create 3 new offenses. The first is the illegal entry from a foreign nation into Texas, which gives the power to peace officers to arrest and detain someone who has entered Texas from a foreign nation, not through a point of entry. And it also gives state judges the ability to remove someone. It also makes a crime for illegal re-entry, which gives peace officers the ability to arrest anyone who is a non-citizen and is entering or attempting to enter, or the scary part, found at any time in Texas after they have been denied admission, deported or removed, or departed the U.S. while having an outstanding removal order. And then the third is the refusal to comply with the order to return, which is comes with an up to 20-year sentence in prison. Now, the issues with this, I also do want to say that there are within the bill, there are some places where enforcement of SB4 should not occur. And those are public and private primary or secondary schools for educational purposes. The second, churches or other established places of worship. Third, health care facilities, but only if you're there to receive treatment. And the fourth are safe, ready facilities, but only if you're there to receive treatment or a forensic medical examination. So that's just the overview of SB4, and I can move on to the problems, but I'll just leave it at that for right now.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and ask this question in Spanish. We can address it again. Exactamente, la SB4, ¿qué permisos daría a la policía y cómo se verían afectados los inmigrantes que no se encuentran legalmente en el país?
Entonces, Jennefer, ¿puede responder para todo?
Primeramente, quiero clarificar que hay 3 diferentes SB4. La primera SB4 es del 2017, que es el SB4 anti-santuario, anti-ciudad santuaria, que todavía está en efecto. Está la SB4 de la tercera sesión, que es en contra del contrabando de personas y da la sentencia mínima a 10 años. Y la tercera SB4 de la 4ª sesión especial es la SB4 de deportación estatal. Y lo que hace la SB4 hace 3 crímenes. La primera es, hace un crimen entrar ilegalmente de un país a Texas. Esto también le da la autoridad a los funcionarios de la policía poder arrestar o detener a una persona si piensan que la persona está aquí ilegalmente y ha entrado a Texas de un país ilegalmente. También le da el poder a jueces estatales para poder deportar a esas personas. El segundo crimen es la entrada de nuevo ilegalmente, que también le da la autoridad a oficiales a poder arrestar a personas que se encuentran en cualquier tiempo en Texas después de haber tenido una orden de deportación o haber salido de los Estados Unidos teniendo una orden de deportación o si le han negado admisión a los Estados Unidos. Y el tercero es que si una persona se rehúsa a no regresar al país, entonces da una sentencia de hasta 20 años en la prisión. Y hay muchos problemas con esta ley, pero por ahorita voy a tomar una pausa ahí.
Gracias. So the next question I want to ask, I'll start with Parker. I'll start with you and Jennefer, and then kind of a follow up to Adrian. So I've heard from some, including some immigrants, that this is only targeting illegal immigration and it doesn't really affect them. So does this affect immigrants in the country legally, and does it affect natural citizens?
Yeah, I think that's the most concerning aspect of this bill, because there's the aspect of how do you spot what are the indicators of somebody who is in the country lawfully? How do you know if an individual is a citizen? And the fact that this bill is statewide removes any like presumption, like to the extent that an individual is found right on the border, that does not necessarily mean that they are not a citizen, but that's an indicator where you might have a probable cause. This goes all the way to downtown Houston, to College Station, to Lubbock. And so from that aspect, that's the really concerning part. The other part that I guess the second aspect of your question is how does it affect individuals who are with status? Well, because we have two systems, immigration has historically, and according to the Supreme Court, is still exclusively in the federal, within the jurisdiction of the federal government. So all of our immigration laws are defined by the federal government. However, now we have a new state law. And because of that, there's a disconnect because the federal law says one thing, the state law says another. So you can be here lawfully under federal immigration law. Let's say that you filed an asylum application and it is pending. That is a lawful status from the perspective of the federal government, but not necessarily from the state of Texas. And so it is sweeping both across the state and across statuses.
I just wanted to add to that, to Parker's last point, by illustrating just how problematic and how much conflict there is with this law, by the example of survivors of crime. So under the federal government, survivors of specific crimes have the ability to apply for a U visa. Also, survivors who have experienced trafficking can also apply for a T visa. Now, under the federal government, ICE has stated in their policy that they will not enforce, meaning they will not arrest and deport someone they encounter who is a survivor who either has a pending application for relief with the federal government or has the ability to apply for said relief. All right. Now, under SB4, all that goes away because the only defenses to prosecution under that first prong, the illegal entry portion of SB4, are that at the time of arrest, you have to have been granted either lawful presence, DACA, or asylum. Now, lawful presence, we don't know how they're going to define it because it's not defined within state law. And actually, within immigration law, I'm seeing I'm having problems with my audio. Let me just connect with my headphones really quickly, see if that helps. But the issue here is that under the state law, the state government is not going to care whether or not you have a pending application, right? There is no protection. And the state law actually clearly in the text says that no pending application is going to abate prosecution, meaning it won't stop. So folks that are here with pending asylum claims, for example, doesn't matter, right? You can still be prosecuted under this bill, and that is very problematic. Additionally, let's talk about the definition of peace officer. Under the Texas Code of Civil Procedure, there is a list of probably over 30 types of classifications of individuals who can count as peace officers. So for example, this includes not only officers and sheriffs, but the fire marshal, insurance commissioner investigators, people that really have no business making these decisions now have the authority under this law to make these decisions. The other issue with this law is that removal orders can happen within hours of an arrest because state judges have the ability to remove someone. So magistrate judges who see people within 48 hours could have the authority to remove someone. And the issue with this is that in many counties, attorneys are not allowed in the magistration process. So we're talking about hundreds of people who will be faced with the decision to either face years in prison or be removed. Making this decision without having proper legal orientation on the consequences that this decision will have.
It's an interesting point. I want to get back to my follow-up question in a little bit. I'm going to jump ahead to another question because it leads right into it for Commissioner Garcia, especially. So in my experience in journalism, I've found that a lot of immigrants have a bit of a tenuous relationship with law enforcement, hesitant to interact with them even when they're needed to help with an investigation. And for their part, when we reached out to the Houston area law enforcement when it had SB4 initially got clearance, it didn't seem like there was a lot of excitement or direction as far as enforcing it. But regardless, with legislation like SB4, whether it's SB4 or any other legislation, what effect does this have on the relationship between immigrants and law enforcement? And Commissioner Garcia, with your history of law enforcement, I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
Thank you, Codell. And I want to begin by first thanking the Houston Chronicle, you, Codell, and Colleen for hosting this event. This is a very, very important conversation, and it does affect everyone, regardless of status. I do want to wrap up a bit of the point of your first question as to how or does this affect people who are here legally? The reality of it is it can, because it's totally subjective to the officer who is attempting to enforce the law. If you happen to be here for years, like my mom, who's just celebrated her 100th birthday, she still doesn't have command of the English language, and that could be the probable cause that an officer would use to take her to custody. So it can affect everyone. In fact, we need to remember that State Senator Chuy Hinojosa, when he was 7 years old, was deported along with his mother, purely in a subjective instance of enforcement back then. And so we still are at risk with this particular law. But to your question as to how does this affect the relationship? The relationship has always been strained with people from other parts of the world, Mexico in particular, and Central America, with local law enforcement. You got to remember that in other parts of the world, law enforcement isn't the law enforcement that we enjoy here in the United States. It's paramilitary in other parts of the world. And so there's already a strained relationship to begin with. And then you come here, you're not likely to go to an officer immediately and try to have a conversation or report a crime. And so with SB4 now and all the other subjective rhetoric that Trump brings to the table, in particular, that we've been hearing from our governor and our lieutenant governor, all it does is just deepen the suspicion and the concern that migrants and immigrants may have in our community. You got to remember, they are part of our economy, whether we like to admit that or not. And many of them are here simply to make a better life for their families, like my family when they immigrated to Houston in 1959.
Parker and Jennefer, have you had any experience with? Have you noticed like clients who have been worried about talking with law enforcement or are nervous? And if so, what are some of the reasons you're hearing?
I think there's actually a through line. That's a great question. Thank you. And I think the through line is to connect both what Jennefer and Commissioner Garcia were just saying. So because of this historically strained relationship, because of the fact that there are so many layers, like to Jennefer's point of there are so many different peace officers, how do you know which police officers are the ones that you can trust or ones that are going to deport you, especially when they all look the same? So precisely for that very reason, again, the federal immigration laws have specific forms of relief, specific options that are designed to bring people out of the shadows so that they're not victims of crime, victims of human trafficking, or victims of domestic violence simply because of their immigration status, fearing coming out and reporting their abuser. So to whom do they have to report? Well, this is where it's a real tragedy. One aspect of the real tragedy of this bill is to whom do you report? Well, you report it to local law enforcement. So this bill, by its own face, is making a reason for distrust when previously there wasn't necessarily always that reason.
And I mean, I imagine this has to be, Adrian, maybe you can speak to this, but this has to be frustrating. It has to be frustrating for law enforcement too. I mean, look at HPD right now; they're trying to reach out to people for the drop cases that came up recently, and so I know we know of at least one case was Spanish speakers. So like, is there like a frustration? Is there a frustration with things like this that kind of hinder some of their initiatives?
Codell, absolutely there is. And that's why at Commissioner's Court, I championed the U Visa initiative, working to construct a model universal policy that all agencies in Harris County could adopt to help them navigate the implementation of the certification letter for U visas, which is the visa that victims of violent crimes can use to help law enforcement make the case against their offenders. But when you have laws like SB4 that become front and center of a daily conversation, especially by elected officials, and for the ridiculous reasons that they try to promote and the rhetoric that they work to contribute, it absolutely frustrates our efforts to keep our community safe. And so I want to go back to the point again that, how does this affect, people who are here legally, like you and I? It affects us because now it works to keep people who have information about illegal activities happening in the community from coming forward and reporting that to law enforcement when otherwise we built trust over the years since my days coming into the Houston Police Department. Laws like this do nothing but to deteriorate it and destroy it in an instant. And that's what SB4 has done. So it absolutely frustrates our efforts to keep the community safe, to protect everyone, and to gain information that can help us make our communities and our counties even safer. So this is a law that not only will cost everyone additional money, because it's an unfunded mandate by the governor, but it also is a law that makes us less safe because people with information are less likely to step forward and report it to law enforcement because, as Parker said earlier, who do you trust? The legislation did not come with any training, any required training, didn't pay for any training. So now it's up to the various law enforcement leadership to work to construct that type of training program to ensure that SB4 would be implemented in the most judicial way, and constitutional way, rather than just leaving it up to a local law enforcement officer to apply it and not knowing what personal biases that individual officer may have.
I want to move on to my next question. You brought up the rhetoric. So immigration's kind of become a go-to issue for voters. The most recent Gallup poll in February, the people they polled said that it was the most important problem in the country today. How did it come to the point where not everyone, but where people are that worried about immigration, and how is it driving the push for laws like SB4?
The rhetoric is immensely loud. When you try to make the argument that these individuals are contributing to our economy, they're absolutely serving our food, they're absolutely repairing our roofs, they're absolutely constructing our streets, they're absolutely mowing our lawns, that gets lost to things like the former president just said the other day, how they're creeping through our windows and hiding in our bushes and doing all kinds of things and creating an invasion. You got to remember that the siege on our nation's capital wasn't done by women trying to seek asylum for their children and their families. It was done by those who listened to the rhetoric of hate and hatred and division. And so when you have that type of rhetoric and when you have individuals like that with those access to those microphones, it absolutely becomes a problem and drives the need for elected officials to believe that this legislation is good governance and good policy, which it absolutely is not. It costs money, it makes communities less safe, and it works to create divisions in communities that we ought to have relationships and confidence in.
I just want to expand upon that point because SB4 would not exist without Operation Lone Star. Now let's talk about what Operation Lone Star is, or as I will call it, OLS. So in March of 2021, Governor Abbott created Operation Lone Star, which is a state-led immigration enforcement program that is backed by billions. And I will actually go into the amount in a second. The stated purpose was to respond to the border crisis, but Ken Paxton has stated that he actually wants to challenge Arizona v. United States, which is a decision that states that states cannot create their own immigration laws because that belongs solely to the federal government. Now, what happens is that under Operation Lone Star, Governor Abbott has ordered Department of Public Safety officers, state troopers, and Texas National Guards to these high threat areas to arrest and charge migrants for trespass on private land, transfer migrants to separate state prisons that have been converted to migrant jails, and funnel migrants through a separate court system. So let's talk about these trespass charges. There is clear evidence and videos from migrants, from people that have gone in and have witnessed this, that DPS has told people, hey, walk along 5 miles up the river. And up the river, you will find Border Patrol where you can turn yourself in. People seeing the uniform trust that, walk 5 miles up the river. But lo and behold, who is there waiting for them? Not CBP, not Border Patrol. It is troopers who have led migrants onto private property to then arrest them for criminal trespass. And let's even talk about that. There is no postage. There's no signs giving people notice that they're entering private property. There is no warning about this. Additionally, let's talk about the arrests under Operation Lone Star, which are riddled with discrimination. So in addition to the misuse of private funds, which again, I'll walk into in a minute, Operation Lone Star has opened the door to racial profiling. And I will say this. So we have seen, and complaints have already been made, that there are probable cause affidavits, which are allegations of fact from the officer that form the basis for the arrest. There are probable cause affidavits that clearly show the collusion between law enforcement and militia groups. In one such probable cause affidavit, DPS, so state troopers, are coming up to the scene. Border Patrol is watching this. As they come up to the scene, 2 civilians, 2 strangers, have rifles pointed at migrants, okay? And then that was probable cause for arrest. Let's talk about the discriminatory traffic stops. In one probable cause affidavit, the state trooper has allegedly stopped someone for having an illegal window tent. Surprise, surprise, the tent is legal, okay? Now let me read you this excerpt from this probable cause affidavit that was submitted to the court. As I spoke to the driver on the driver's side, I smelled an odor that was emanating from inside the vehicle. Through my training and experience working alongside Border Patrol, I identified the smell as an odor that is associated with human smuggling. Undocumented aliens emit a distinct odor due to sweat and being exposed in the environment. That is in a probable cause affidavit, okay? Now, at the beginning of Operation Lone Star, judges who saw these flagrant violations were dismissing these cases. What happened to those judges? They were kicked off the bench. And only the judges that allowed these flagrantly despicable probable cause affidavits to continue are the ones that stayed on the bench. Let's also talk about the increase in deadly vehicle pursuits under this. The Human Rights Watch has a published report from November of 2023 that outlines pursuits that go up to 120 miles per hour. And at least 74 people have been killed and 189 have been injured. So this didn't happen overnight, folks. This has been a systematic otherizing of a group of people. In the district court's opinion about SB4, Judge Ezra, in his 114-page decision, dedicated over half of those pages to dismantling the invasion rhetoric. And time again, immigration is not an invasion. And if you want to hear more about that, I invite you to read that very lengthy decision that goes through each and every one of those points. So Operation Lone Star has been the bedrock of this, and which led to the codification of this hate and unconstitutional practice in last year's legislative session. Now let's talk about the waste of money, right? To date, this operation has been active for 3 years. Within 3 years, we're set to waste $10 billion with a B, billion dollars on this political stunt that is not a solution to the root issues of migration, right? Criminalizing is not going to stop it because that is not the root issue. That is not the root cause, right? $10 billion of our Texas taxpayer money has been wasted. That is money that could go through fixing our power grid. That is money that could go to funding our public education. Border counties have stated that they just want clean water. They want streetlights. They want paved roads. $10 billion, folks, from our pockets goes to this, which is riddled with violations and is unconstitutional and illegal.
Well, let's bridge from that into kind of the final question I want to ask. And I'll direct this to Parker and Jennefer. What legal advice would you give immigrants or those suspected of being in the country illegally if this or another law like this passes? What legal advice would you give them, and what advice would you give immigrants in general when they do need to interact with law enforcement?
So I think it's simple in like what to do and what not to do. What not to do, do not lie. Be truthful. But what do you have to provide? What information do you have to provide? Your name, your address, and your date of birth. Do you have to answer any questions about your immigration status? No. Moreover, you still have a constitutional right to an attorney. So to the extent that you are detained and you have made it into, let's say, a jail, you do not necessarily have to, well, you do not have to provide any information apart from name, date of birth, and address, absent speaking with an attorney. So requesting an attorney, I think, is incredibly important. And then, yeah, I'm curious to hear what Jennefer builds up off that.
Yeah, of course. One important thing just to remind folks is that under SB4, if you're a US citizen, a lawful permanent resident, if you cannot prove your status on the spot, you can still be arrested. So just wanted to clarify that this impacts us all. If you look like you don't belong, maybe you speak with an accent, you're not white, guess what? You can be caught up with this too. Now, I do want to say that additionally to what Parker was saying, the Constitution gives anyone and everyone rights, irrespective of your immigration status. And as Parker said, people have the right to remain silent. Now, here in Texas, we have some failure to ID laws. And under that law, if you are under arrest, you have to give your name, date of birth, or residence. But you do not have to answer or provide anything about your immigration status. You do not have to ever show state officials anything about your immigration papers or status or anything like that. So you have the right to remain silent in that instance. Now, if you are a passenger in a vehicle or you are not under arrest, you don't have to give them anything, okay? A lot of the times we have heard that people get caught up because passengers are also giving their passports or other identifications to law enforcement. That does not have to happen, okay? If you don't know if you're under arrest, you can ask, right? You can say, am I under arrest? If the officer says no, you can ask, may I leave? And if they say yes, you can leave. Walk away, don't run, right? Because running, that's gonna give another suspicion that you're hiding something, and all that went to waste, right? So also, you have the right to not consent to unlawful searches of your person or your vehicle. The officers have to do this with a warrant, right? There are some exceptions, but for the most part, generally, you have the right against this. And again, right, the right to an attorney. But I do want to clarify that the Constitution only gives you a right to an attorney under criminal matters, not immigration matters.
And Codell, very quickly, I do want to add to this that regretfully, one of the things that those who believe that this could affect them directly, they need to have available to them an attorney who understands both criminal law and immigration law. Please make sure that you know who you're potentially, call in and have that number available to you, so that the advice that both Parker and Jennefer have given, that you can execute it, remain silent. You have that constitutional right. You have the right not to answer any questions without your attorney present. But you need to have someone that you can call immediately and have that number in your wallet at all times.
Can I add on to that?
Oh, sorry.
I think the key, or one thing is an unfortunate reality, is having a plan. And having a plan moving forward, and not just from to whom you're going to call, but also when you're in that situation, it can be incredibly disorienting. If you go in, unfortunately, knowing that this could happen, I think it allows you to remember what your rights are and aren't. And so the other aspect is, I think that there's a human desire to want to cooperate. That's not necessarily in your best interest, and it's your right not to cooperate. So I just encourage people to remember that.
So I'll go ahead and ask in Spanish, and because I think we're hitting our time limit. So quickly, si la SB4 se aprueba, ¿tienes algún consejo legal para los inmigrantes en caso de ser detenidos, especialmente si son indocumentados? ¿Algún consejo en general sobre cómo interactuar con la policía?
Sí, en primero solo quiero decir que toda persona, no importa su estatus migratorio, tiene derechos y protecciones bajo la Constitución de los Estados Unidos. Primeramente, bajo la Quinta Enmienda, todos tenemos el derecho de permanecer callados, y este es el más importante. Porque muchas veces uno ve el uniforme, se pone en pánico y empieza a hablar. Y el trabajo de los oficiales es mucho más fácil cuando uno le da las informaciones. Pero Aquí en el estado de Texas, las únicas preguntas que usted tiene que responder si está arrestado es, tiene que dar su nombre, su domicilio, su dirección de residencia y su fecha de nacimiento. Si no está bajo arresto, usted, y no sabe si está bajo arresto, usted puede preguntarle al oficial si está bajo arresto. Si dice que no, le puede preguntar si se puede ir. Y se le dice que sí, es importante irse caminando, no corriendo, porque eso puede dar causa a que piensen que usted hizo algo malo y esa es otra cosa, ¿verdad? La segunda parte es que si usted es un pasajero en un vehículo, usted no necesita dar ninguna información si no está bajo arresto, ¿ok? Es importante tener esto porque muchas veces hemos escuchado de personas que han sido arrestadas y deportadas por simplemente ser pasajeros en un carro, ¿ok? Bajo la cuarta enmienda, usted tiene el derecho de no dar consentimiento a una búsqueda de su propiedad o su persona. Hay algunas excepciones, pero por la mayor parte, los policías o oficiales necesitan tener una orden judicial para poder registrarle sus cosas. Y bajo la sexta enmienda, todos tenemos derecho a un abogado. Desafortunadamente, esto solo existe para los procedimientos criminales, no para los de inmigración. Es muy importante tener el número de un abogado de inmigración listo por cualquier cosa y también tener un plan familiar.
Codell, quiero agregar un punto muy importante. En el momento que cuando un oficial llega a detenerlos, yo sé que esto puede tener mucho estrés. Uno sabe que no ha hecho nada criminal. Uno tiene el preocupamiento de su familia en mente. Es muy importante de no actuar como si estás resistiendo el arresto o la entrevista que el oficial está haciendo, porque eso puede causar una ofensa criminal que pueden agregar y causar mucho más problemas para una persona. Así que, por favor, traten de mantener calma y lleguen a implementar los consejos de Parker y Jennefer.